So they're doing season 2 of 13 Reasons Why, and so that means that I'm now officially annoyed about it. I did not love the series when I watched the first season. I binge watched it along with everyone else. And I had read the book when I was in, I think, middle school or early on when I was in high school. And I remember the book resonating a lot with me, but things in the book were definitely handled in a very different way from things in the show. And I think that the show, especially now, is kind of showing how it was really exploiting the topic of suicide as opposed to meaningfully discussing the topic of suicide. And I think this for a number of reasons. First of all, and I think this is kind of the most important thing, and the first thing that I noticed when I was watching the show, the way the show is not shot in such a way that it provides you a gritty, realistic look at suicide and the aftermath. The way it's shot is it frames Hannah in this very cinematic way as this tragically beautiful figure, this tragically beautiful heroine. And scenes like her lying in the basketball court bleeding out, or worst of all, when they actually showed her suicide on screen. And this one, I think, for me, is when I decided that the series was getting exploitive as opposed to just discussing the issue. Because in the book, the way Hannah dies is very vague. She commits suicide with pills or something. In the show, they have an extremely graphic scene where she cuts her wrists, and then they do that incredibly cheesy thing that every suicide-related thing, especially when a woman commits suicide in TV and movies, which is the bathtub full of blood. Even when they don't commit suicide, it's a trope, if you think about it in Dexter. So they included that cinematic trope that was not even remotely necessary in the context of the book. And the way that they did it was a way that, basically showed it as her last resort and her making a conscious decision. And I think in a lot of ways, first, it erased the role of mental illness in a lot of people's suicides. A lot of people who commit suicide don't commit suicide because their life is unbearable. Some do. And by unbearable, I mean the circumstances of their life, like their interpersonal relationships, etc., are terrible. For example, an acquaintance pretty recently committed suicide, and his, at least from the outside, his life looked fine. He had a loving girlfriend, a newborn child, and he had a lot of friends and was part of a lot of very loving communities. And so making it seem as simple as if you were nicer to this person, they wouldn't kill themselves, it fucks people up in a lot of ways. Because also, people who watch that show, especially high schoolers who may have friends commit suicide, will start blaming themselves and wondering what they did. And the way the TV show is promoted, as though it's supposed to be a PSA, or as if it's supposed to be taken seriously as mental health advice, is also really frustrating, because most mental health professionals said that the way that they shot it is harmful to people who may be suicidal or experiencing thoughts of self-harm. The way they kind of do that manic pixie dream girl bullshit around these characters that are really damaged, it just grates on me. And so now the fact, I could justify doing one season, doing 13 episodes, and, and telling this story, and I guess I could understand it and think that maybe the motivation was good and it was just the execution that was a problem. And now they're doing season 2. And it really pisses me off that they're doing a season 2, and I kind of anticipated it from the way that they expanded all the other storylines around it. But, with just the name of the title and the context, it doesn't really make sense to do a season 2. Hannah's story is over. All of this stuff that they set up, there already was some payoff. They could have just concluded it the way it is, and they've already gotten a lot of feedback from mental health professionals, from people who are dealing with mental illnesses and suicidal tendencies, and I'm not really confident that they're going to use that feedback well. So, I'll probably watch it so that I can bitch about it, but I'm pretty frustrated with this series and, with the fact that it exists. And I say this, having been like an emo teenager. I've had depression for most of my life, and it was particularly bad as a teenager. And at some point I did do self-harm. Luckily, it wasn't as chronic as some other people's. But I would say that stories and TV shows like this, as a teenager, did actually make me think that that was a way to get attention, basically. And it does worry me because ultimately that's what a lot of teenagers want, especially from friends and family, especially when they feel invisible. And the fact that, they basically portray Hannah as being isolated and alone and then killing herself and having all these people suddenly pay attention and care, I find it concerning because it is going to plant these ideas in people's heads, especially young people, that this is a good and effective way to gain attention. I think that when you're far removed from being a teenager, it's easy to forget how influential television shows and things like that are, especially to people who are feeling alone or feeling like they don't fit in and feel like that, when they see someone else and they identify with a character like that and then they see them handle the problem that way, it is dangerous. And there have already been several suicides that have been similar in nature, and I don't think you can necessarily, blame the TV show insofar as I don't think you should be able to sue them or anything, but I think you can't deny that that does show that this show does have an influencing effect on teenagers who are considering doing that. Whether it just changes the manner in which they do it, or whether it's the deciding thing that makes them decide to take the plunge, I think that it's really important to be careful with shows like this and to remember that while subject matter like this makes for good TV, it does have an impact, it does matter, and it does impact the target audience that watches it. These TV shows don't exist in a vacuum, they don't exist in a bubble, and when people watch them, especially young people who are in that position, it can make a difference in their real lives. And so for me, the fact that that they're doing season 2, and it's probably going to continue with the trend of glorifying suicide and basically using suicide as a method to make people take you seriously, I don't think any real good can come of this. In the description down below, I will put some links to some resources if you feel like you need help. Remember that, everyone is loved by someone and that you do matter, and suicide is not the way to make people start caring about you. So that's everything I have for you on this subject. Be sane.